Hello and welcome on Watch This TV, and it's this time of the year where we have our yearly talk with Mr. Olivier Müller from Luxeconsult to go over the Morgan Stanley report. And since we got a little bit carried away and talked for 4 hours, well, we decided to divide this into different segments, 4 to be precise. In the first one, we'll go over general global market dynamics. We'll talk about the notion of premiumization. We'll talk about Quartz versus mechanics, and we'll talk about also the dynamic per country, what is happening on the various markets. Part 2 will focus more on some of the big players such as Rolex, AP, Richard Mille, Omega, a little bit of Swatch Group. In part 3, we'll talk more about LVMH, the Swatch Group in general, and Breitling. Yeah, some interesting stories there. And in part 4, we'll focus a little bit more on independence, as well as to talk about non-Swiss brands, what is happening over there. All right, so stay tuned, enjoy the show, and obviously we'll publish a full version of it as a podcast that you'll be able to download on the main platforms. Enjoy. See you soon. Hello and welcome on Watch This TV, and it's this time of the year for our kind of yearly summary of what happened in 2025 with Olivier Müller of Luxeconsult, and because we're going to talk about the Morgan Stanley report, the 9th edition of this report, and it's a report that is widely looked after by the industry as a whole, but also from other people because it's intended for, financial and financial institutions and investors. There's been a little bit of a few controversy about some of the numbers within this report. Let's put it that way. So I think it's important that we come back on the methodology because, numbers are quite scarce in this industry. Not that many people like to appreciate to talk about them. We have listed companies, we have private-owned companies, but nonetheless, one of the key denominator is that numbers are pretty hard to fetch. So tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain a few things which we have talked about before, but we lay totally, it's an open book. Yeah? We have the methodology being explained within the report. Mm-hmm. It's on page 23 this year, yeah. And basically what we decided to do when we started with the first report, which was 2018 based on the 2017 figures, we decided that we needed to compare very different brands in terms of structure of distribution, retail, etc., that we needed to compare them on a comparable basis, apple with apples, peers with peers, and hence we decided to calculate the market shares of each brand on a retail value basis. Mm-hmm. And to do that, we need to do a certain number of estimates. We have never said that it's a scientific report and that we have access to all the figures within the Swiss watch industry. That's not the case, and we have never alluded to the fact that we would have access to everyone. But on the other hand, we do have access to quite some numbers, interesting figures. Sometimes, of course, those figures are contradicting what people say in the media, etc., and that's why probably it's a little bit disturbing for some people, especially these days, trying to take away the legitimacy of our work. So basically what we do estimate is, of course, the sales, turnover, the units sold by the brand, the margin given to the distribution, the percentage of integration at the wholesale level and retail level, because that makes a lot of difference. Always give the same examples. If you take Richard Mille, 100% of Richard Mille's turnover is being done direct to consumer. It's 42 point of sales worldwide, selling 100% of Richard Mille's watches. Hence, the turnover is not comparable with a brand. Let's take Rolex, the number one dominant. Rolex until 2 years ago was 100% almost, because they had one boutique in Geneva, but almost 100% was going to third-party retailers. And that changed a little bit with the integration of Bucherer, which is now retailing, owned by Rolex and retailing Rolex and other brands, of course. And we had to integrate that also in the sales of Rolex. And then with all those figures, all those estimates, we then converted into retail values, which allow us to calculate the overall value of the market and to calculate each brand's market share.
So let's start with the big figure, the one that is, let's say, undisputed regarding just watch exports coming out of Switzerland. So there's been a slight contraction in 25 compared to 24, but nonetheless, I mean, if you compare it to 2019, we're still above that. So I mean, it's people are okay, maybe sometimes playing the doomsday book theory, but at the same time, I mean, the industry has still had a growth over the last, let's say, 6-7 years. So slight decline. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, it was a very small decline of minus 1.7%.
In value.
In value, on average. That's a very important thing. Yes. I always emphasize, and sorry for repeating myself year after year, but the thing is, if you have the 4 biggest brands in terms of market shares, for instance, and you come up with those 4, which are Rolex, Cartier, Audemars Piguet, and Omega in terms of market shares. I'm going to explain why Omega is 5th, because they are 5th in terms of sales, but 4th in terms of market shares. And when those 4 brands already capture 55% of the whole market, you can understand that if most of them or all of them, unfortunately it's not the case for Omega, but if most of them overperform the market, then of course the average is not so much relevant anymore. We could take also the example of the big 4, which is Rolex, Audemars Piguet, Patek Philippe, and Richard Mille, and those come up to almost now half of the markets. It's 49% captured by the big 4. So you instantly understand that if those brands perform well, then the overall market doesn't look that bad. And then if you dive into the details, you see that there are many brands which were strongly in the high minus single digits year on year, and then you have even people being in the double digit minus, and some of those are not happy because we are writing it. Some don't have a problem because they stick to the truth and they have no problem exchanging information.
But what's interesting is that those 4, their market share has grown. I mean, and so we have 4 players that are really, I mean, capturing basically not the entire market, but above 50%. And from year to year, they consolidate this.
Absolutely, it's a virtuous dynamic, as I always call it, because it's very simple. The bigger you get, the more money you are making, because you can do economies of scale. You're becoming more efficient. Your brand awareness increases over proportionally, etc. Especially on markets like the US, which was the one market post-COVID which grew and partially compensated for the downturn of China. So if you're strong, you make a lot of money. Your margin keep increasing because you earn more money. You can reinvest more money. You get more brand awareness, etc., etc. We are not talking about the niche. Of high-end or not, or middle range, etc. But we are talking about the main market. That's why those brands are performing so well. And in the first place, Rolex. Rolex is now up with 1/3 of the overall Swiss-made watches. So that's quite an impressive achievement.
Absolutely. I saw that indeed in the report. You state that they were like at 26% just a few years back, and now they're indeed at 33%. So just again consolidating, getting more power, and it, as you mentioned, I mean, it's really creating a virtuous circle basically.
Yeah.
But then there can be a kind of a downward spiral for other brands, and we'll get back on this in a short while. Something also that you highlight quite clearly in the report is this notion of premiumization. I hate to say this word, it's a complicated one to say, but you see what I mean. And something that I find it quite interesting is that watches above 50,000 Swiss franc,
Yes.
Is that retail value?
Retail
value, okay. Account for 37% of the total value,
Yes.
but only representing 1.4% of volumes.
That's absolutely, and that shows how dangerous the whole evolution is. And that is about the only point which I would agree with someone I'm not going to name. It's like Harry Potter here. We are not going to name him. It's about the only point I agree with is the extraordinary risk that we're taking as an industry to rely only on the high end, because this shows exactly what is happening year after year. The volumes are declining. Last year we lost again 700,000 units. We are down to 14.6 million watches exported from Switzerland, which amounts more or less to the sales. I'm not going too much into the detail how we come up with all those statistics, but basically it shows how thin the fundamentals are becoming. And just another number, Swatch Group alone with its 16 brands accounts for about 60% of the whole volume.
Yes.
That's impressive. And if you add up the 1.2 million watches sold by Rolex, you are up to 70% almost of the whole cake of Swiss-made watches. So it shows how thin the fundamental is, and how the volumes are reducing because we premiumize. We're selling less of more expensive watches, etc., etc. That's dragging away the volumes for the industrial basis, and that's increasingly becoming a problem.
But it's important to highlight, indeed. I mean, the Swatch Group is in an industrial group. It was built like that, and I don't think people realize that, indeed, they produce 60% of the entire Swiss production.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's massive. It's really a huge player regarding the volume, and the fact of maintaining those industrial capabilities, I mean, requires those type of volumes. Regarding still volumes, I saw another interesting figure there regarding quartz and mechanical watches, because indeed volumes are going down, but so since 2011, volumes have halved, but in 2024, you have 9.4 million watches, quartz watches that were sold, but 5.2 mechanical watches. And a few years back, it was like 5.5 mechanical watches. So the trend regarding mechanical watches is much less going downwards compared to quartz watches.
Absolutely.
So is there a future for Swiss quartz watches?
Indeed. I'm very much convinced of that. First of all, because we introduced solar quartz technology, which is very interesting in terms of energy consumption. It's sustainable. There are more and more brands coming to that. Again, Swatch Group, there is the one, or no, not one. They are the leaders in this technology. They have used that for quite some times. For instance, at Tissot for the T-Touch Solar Connected, which has an extraordinary power reserve. On the rest, I'm not going to comment for obvious reasons. But that's an extremely interesting technology. Cartier did the first launch, which was not so successful, but that was not so much because of the product. It was more an issue of the technology itself. Now they are following up with a better product, and you can see with Tank at Cartier that you have that solar technology. LVMH is coming up with that, even at Tiffany. So that's just to say that quartz doesn't equal cheap. That was the problem of this product, with very few exceptions in the watch industry, with people managing the image of that product. For instance, Grand Seiko, who always remain with either quartz or a mix of quartz and mechanical, which is a very interesting technology as well. So quartz doesn't equal cheap. Quartz is interesting. And it's coming more and more. At Longines, it's ultra precision quartz, etc. So there is a market there, not only in the middle range, also in the premium line. You have jewelry watches for women where you use quartz because it's small, it's light, etc. And it's very cheap, and it's very easy to exchange because it doesn't cost anything. So that takes away a little bit of the sustainable element, but that's another story. So quartz is not doomed, but the people selling quartz need to make their clients understand that it's a different type of watchmaking. I am an old guy in love with, even manual winding, which is even of another age. But I see all the advantages of quartz, even more so if we use the solar technology, which is abundant. So there is a future.
So the efforts in research and development within that field of watchmaking is still there.
Absolutely.
And there's still a room for further improvements, and then with the proper communication, then people can understand what's behind a bit more. Okay, well, it's interesting. So let's talk about now some of the performance of brands and groups. And we see something that is quite unusual compared to other type of the branches of the industry, the luxury industry, is that privately held brands perform better than the public listed one. And that's kind of an oddity, like as I mentioned, compared to other luxury sectors. Is there an explanation for this?
Yes, there is. And before I start explaining why there is difference, there is one exception to this, which is Cartier. And I shall make a disclaimer because there are people implying that I have conflicts of interest. Yes, I do. So I love some people, other people I love less. I love some brands, other brands I dislike a little bit, but I'm not talking about them. So I'm not paid by Richemont. I'm not paid by Cartier. I've never been. Okay, disclaimer. But those are really extraordinary brands, and now I forgot your question. Sorry, because
I was saying that privately owned brands compared to listed companies. Yeah, there we are.
I'm getting old, Yes. There is a very, very basic explanation for that. Is the time frame that you are taking in account. When you are the owner of Patek Philippe, when you are the owner of Audemars Piguet, etc., you are not thinking in terms of quarters because you are not a listed company. You don't have people like us with Morgan Stanley asking why you underperformed last quarter or last year, etc., because you don't have to give accounts to anyone. And I would strongly advise with people who are frustrated with the financial community to take, if they are listed, to take their companies private. That would be a good first step to regain their autonomy and their freedom to do whatever they deem to be good for their company. So basically, it's the time frame. They look long term. They reinvest in their company. The level of debt is very low, if at all. Most of them, let's take a company like Patek Philippe or Audemars Piguet, zero debts, at least to my best knowledge. Everything is paid for, every single machine, every building, etc. That gives you, how shall I say, let's take a very specific example. You launch the Cubitus at Patek Philippe. Some people dislike it, others love it, some speculate on it. But at the end of the day, Patek Philippe does what it deems to be the best for the brand, for the company. When they discontinued the 5711 in stainless steel of the Nautilus line, they just did it, and then it was gone. Imagine someone at LVMH or Richemont or Swatch Group telling his boss that he's going to discontinue.
Yeah, not possible.
The bestseller of the brand. I don't think you survive the next minute as the CEO of that brand.
Yeah.
So that explains a lot. That explains why they are so overperforming, because they plan long term. I'm not saying none of the listed companies have a little bit of that thinking, but it's long term. Hermes, Hermes took almost now 2 decades to reshuffle the product offering at watches. They have recentered, refocused on more mechanical, more traditional watches, etc., etc. Hermes has done a tremendous job. They took, as I said, 2 decades. They are listed. That's the difference. But there is a very important anchor shareholder, which is the family, and the family, as they always say, they're here for eternity.
Yeah.
And sorry, just one last point, and one thing which I shall add is that in watches the product cycles are very much longer than in most, or I would say almost any other, maybe comparable with cars. Cars are also a very long product cycles because you need a lot of time to develop new engines, etc., etc. You see now the transition of technology from conventional engines to electric, etc., to EVs. It takes a lot of time. In the watch industry, we need a lot of time to develop new products, and that explains why privately held companies also perform better, because they take the time. You know, the Cubitus, I'm back at the Cubitus, was the first new product launch or new product family since a quarter of a century at Patek Philippe. Think of this. This is quite remarkable. And kudos to Patek. Patek is looking for decades, for generations.
For generations, let's use that word, that suits them well. So yeah, interesting indeed, probably in the other luxury industry, other sectors, I mean, you're a watch industry expert, but indeed, in the other industries, probably, I mean, the life cycle is much shorter, and then it's a completely different mind game, and then perhaps having higher yields and performance is something that can be managed a little bit differently than in the watchmaking industry. And coming back to Hermes, I mean, they've accepted to reduce significantly the volumes that they were.
Tremendous. They were selling 20 years ago. They were selling more or less between 260, 280,000 watches. They are down to not even 70,000, even a little bit below. So it's a total refocusing on what this product category is about. That's the important thing to understand, that 20 years ago you would sell a watch at Hermes as an accessory to create traffic in the boutiques for the core business. And today Hermes is selling a watch as its own product category, and they want to be seen as serious people doing serious watches, etc. Another interesting thing, but we are not going to drive too much. But another interesting thing is how they do smartwatches. Instead of doing the mistake that other brands have done, other groups have done, trying to compete with people they will never be able to compete with, they have done a collab with Apple, and those Apple by Hermes watches sell very well and at a substantial premium compared with the normal Apple watches.
Interesting indeed. Before again diving a little bit deeper with the again performance of brands and groups, let's say on the macro level a little bit, and let's talk market dynamics in terms of geographies, and what can we say about 2025 regarding these the different dynamics?
Yep. First of all, post-COVID, we have seen a strong shift towards the US. The US has been a very fast-growing market. One reason, of course, is the overall economic situation with all the wealth that has been created during COVID. There were many liquidities injected into the economy, which by collateral creates buying power. The product category of watches within the luxury industry in the US was substantially lower at about 11% of the whole spending of the luxury goods spending in the US, which is substantially lower than the worldwide average, which is estimated by Bain to be at about 15% of the personal luxury goods, where you have leather goods, etc. So that gave already an idea of the potential that this market has. But it's a very demanding market. Why? Because it's huge. You need to create brand awareness that costs money, and some brands were very weak until COVID, because COVID was really a game changer for anything. So post-COVID, many brands understood that they needed to diversify away from China. And China, unlike what some people see, which I don't see anywhere, and I'm going to explain why, because there is a good reason that the luxury consumption is down in China. It didn't restart post-COVID, where it left 2019. And the bad news is, I dare to forecast that it's not going to be the case anytime soon. It doesn't mean that the Chinese market disappeared, and now it seems that finally it bottomed, and that finally we're seeing a little bit an improving situation. The not so positive news is when I see the number one in the world of luxury good called LVMH selling its duty-free business in China. This for me is a very strong signal that that market is not seen, and I mean as being potentially growing again. And I mean, it's LVMH.
Yeah.
You like or dislike them, you like the brands, you dislike the brands, but overall it's still a very well performing group, etc. So when they go out of China, it's probably because they think that it's done in terms of growth. Again, I'm not saying it's disappearing. I think that the recent improving numbers, at least in the export figures, in China, were mostly due to the recapturing of offshore spending by the Chinese, because as you may know, they had quite some issues between the Japanese and the Chinese, and the Chinese government now is not so much anymore in favor that the Chinese tourists go over there and spend their money because the yen was low, etc., etc. So that was more of a reshoring. And last but not least, 70%, that's an estimate by Morgan Stanley, which most of the financial institutions agree with. 70% of the wealth of the private Chinese is being invested in real estate. And real estate the prices are still plummeting. My colleagues at Morgan Stanley just issued a report showing that the prices are still going down. So if you lose value on your main investment, might be an apartment, it might be 2 apartments, whatever. I don't think you're going to spend the same amount of your discretionary budget on luxury goods if your main investment is losing value. It's a very simple, basic reason.
Yeah, and regarding China, I mean, it's really the entire luxury industry that has been hit. Probably the watchmaking, maybe the hardest, but I mean, it's overall luxury spendings have gone down in all different sectors. Regarding Europe and other, well, let's remain maybe in Asia. Is there anything that can be said about the rest of Asia?
Sure. The markets, there are some good news with South Korea. There are some mixed news about Japan. Japan took a lot of advantage of their low currency. The yen took a hit, especially compared to the Swiss franc. A lot of tourism. Japan became the destination to go to because it's an extraordinary country with a very, very unique culture. Yes, you have here and there, you have positive news, but I'm always a little bit, inclined to say that you can't just say because one market is doing well that everyone is doing well there. You have to look at each brand, how they perform on the different markets. Asia overall is okay. China won't be the growth market anymore what it used to be, at least for I would say at least midterm, the next probably few years. Maybe I'm proven wrong in a decade, but at least it looks like. There is no other China coming behind China. India is growing, and there are very positive news in terms of luxury retail infrastructure, all the money that's being invested in luxury shopping malls, in monobrand boutiques, etc. The import duties are being reduced gradually due to a bilateral agreement with Switzerland. This is all good news, but in terms of absolute size, it's still far, far, far away from what China has been, and the growth numbers are not the ones we had seen in China for 2 decades.
Yeah. But it still represents an opportunity.
It's still an opportunity. It would be silly not to take advantage of it. Now I'm going to say something nice about the group in Bienne, but that was when Mr. Hayek Sr., who was a visionary, and the people around him decided to invest massively in India. They were the first group to go there, invest money, and still as of today, Rado is the #1 brand in India, and they are doing well there. It's still it's a very complicated market because everything is different, which makes business probably interesting. Then we have the Middle East, which currently undergoes a very, very difficult situation, but if we look at the recent development of the economy, very interesting. Saudi Arabia is really growing, modernizing. I'm quite putting some. I would bet on Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, to a lesser extent, of course, much smaller, etc. For obvious reasons, but Saudi Arabia is probably one of the growth markets. And then, of course, you have the United Arab Emirates with Dubai in the first place, because it's an international melting pot where you have the whole world meeting from all the places. A lot of Russians, which officially can't buy anymore in Russia, so they buy wherever they are, and mainly in Dubai. So those markets are also very interesting. In Europe, it's very diverse, and of course very much linked to tourism. We don't have to be fooled by some figures that we see, because it's mostly concentrated in France. It's Paris and a little bit of Côte d'Azur, then Monaco. Italy, it's Milano, which is booming for obvious reasons, because it became a tax haven for rich people, and then you have Rome, etc. So it's mostly linked to tourism, but not only. COVID had also this positive outcome, that all of a sudden the brands realized that in front of their door they had a lot of consumer, a lot of potential clients whom they probably didn't look after too much when the Chinese were coming massively to Europe and buying everything. You know, we all have these images of huge, I was going to say
this kind
Italian word, but the big coaches coming buses, in with a lot of Chinese tourists buying, and that drifted away the attention of the brands, not looking towards the local consumers. And now all the brands have understood that locally there is buying power. Yeah. Switzerland, of course, it's an island of wellness. So I always tell people to be very careful not to draw conclusions because they live in Geneva or Zurich and think that the rest of the world is spending as much money on watches. It's very, but no, overall, there are markets which had not disappeared again, but which were not very much looked after by some brands, by many brands, and that changed. COVID changed that. And then we have the UK, which is a very special market, because basically you have London, and then you have a little bit of Manchester only because there are football players buying very expensive watches. I mean, it's true. And then you have London, which is again an attraction. Many international people flying through or living there, partially doing business. So it's an important market. The US we have talked about. South America, it's difficult. We can talk about Central America. There is Mexico. Mexico is an extraordinary market because it's very dynamic. There are friends from Tiempo de Relojes who organize every year now twice their exhibition called CIAR. That creates a lot of interest. The watch community comes together. It's nice because there is sunshine. That is maybe also an important point we should talk about quickly. It's all those gatherings with Dubai Watch Week, etc. I
mean, last year was quite a statement by the Dubai Watch Week. You know, it was just like, okay, we're the center of the watchmaking universe, almost. I mean, it was kind of the message that they wanted to have come through, but it was impressive. It was really, really nice indeed, and cozy because it was nice weather and it's easy to go in and out and so forth.
True.
But I mean, we live in a world today with so many geopolitical uncertainties. It's quite an adverse environment. But something that we didn't mention, which has a direct impact, is obviously the strength of the Swiss franc.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. The adverse, the headwinds that we are facing, we have the gold prices going through the roof. That's incredible. I mean, when you have a raw material picking up 50% in value in 12 months, that's becoming an issue for especially for the high end, of course. And then we have a very strong Swiss franc. And when you produce in Switzerland, or at least mainly in Switzerland, that's another vast topic. Then, of course, you're impacted because you sell in yen, you sell in dollars, you sell in pounds, etc., etc. The Swiss franc, just to take an example, on average, 2025 took 12% against the renminbi the Chinese currency, that is impacting you massively, especially if you're overexposed to that market, as some Swatch Group brands still are, unfortunately, and that's why they are over proportionally impacted, and that's why they're always complaining. They are rightfully complaining, but it's impacting anyone, especially a company like Rolex, which is one of the very, very few major Swiss watch brand producing everything in Switzerland. I like to emphasize
to be noted,
on that.
absolutely.
Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, etc., and there are a few other ones which would deserve to be mentioned here. I can't mention all of them, but of course that's a very strong headwinds. That's the cyclical negative impacts. Then you have the geopolitics, which are bringing uncertainty. One thing which economy doesn't like is uncertainty. If it goes up and down, you can plan to decrease or reinvest on the contrary. But if you don't know where the journey goes, and then we had someone in the White House turning around the buttons, once here, once there, we didn't know where the journey was going. Finally, it seems that we came to more or less, let's put it that way, a little bit a more stable situation. Kudos to the watch CEOs who went there. I don't have any problem that he received a very nice clock. By the way, it's not Mr. Trump who received it, it's the United States of America. I don't see any problem. It's about business, it's about jobs in Switzerland, it's about companies, it's about the taxes that those companies pay.
But then if this is offset by a weak dollar, then it kind of...
The problem, of course. The problem is that we are seeing the Swiss economy is always seen as an anchor of being stable. I mean, with what's just happening the last few days, people are brutally reminded that places who seem to be, some places are called the new Switzerland of the Middle East. Yes, maybe, and maybe they are probably even better than we are at many things, but we are in a stable place, at least for the time being. Don't know what the future will be made of. So yes, that's a challenge. The currencies being in a strong economy, people speculating on your currency. I think, unlike someone else, I think the Swiss National Bank does an outstanding job. They are not here to spend billions to fight against speculation. Overall, it's working. It's very hard for entrepreneurs, especially producing in Switzerland, in any segment of the economy.
Yeah, no, for sure. But we'll see how that will evolve this year. But there's a high probability that the Swiss franc will remain quite strong and will have an impact on some of these export figures.